All right, let's... All right. Let's talk about superhero movies.
Houston, we have a problem.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads.
Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb.
Recently, there was a question on Twitter. What movie started the current state of superhero movies? Now, if we're talking about the MCU, there's only really one answer, and that's Iron Man. Iron Man was the actual beginning of the MCU. A lot of people tried to say it was Spider-Man or X-Men, but the truth is those movies, well, they weren't the start of what we're currently looking at. They were part of the rise to it. And the truth is, this started a long time ago, and it's only now that Hollywood has realized the richness of these characters enough to tell these stories. The thing about superhero movies is it's not a genre. They're a type of character. They are using mythology that has existed for thousands of years, just with a certain type of book and character that it's been developed in. If you look back in time, there's been other characters that have had several adaptations that you could look at as a superhero movie. Robin Hood has had over 70 adaptations to film. And they've had varying degrees over the years, but we're still making them because he's a rich character. He has a mythological history that we can continue to update and use.
And why should the people listen to you?
Because, unlike some other Robin Hoods, I can speak with an English accent.
And the same can be said as someone like King Arthur, who we've had several different stories about him and also other Knights of the Round Table that we've built over the years. There was one recently this year. And you can extend it to other characters like Hercules or maybe Sherlock Holmes.
Holmes, what are you doing?
Nothing.
Are you wearing a...
False nose? No.
Tell me that wasn't...
All these characters have rich histories and we'll continue to adapt them because they're great characters. And you can tell great stories with great characters. And that's what we have in comic book movies. It's not a genre. They're just great characters that we can tell genre stories with. The idea of comic book movie started back with the idea of movies, really. Back in 1943, there was a serial for Batman. There were several serials. And this also happened with characters like Captain America, The Shadow, The Phantom, and eventually Superman in 1948 as well. Shazam even had a serial back then. The thing about serials is that essentially it's like watching a TV show before there was TV. That's what it was. You go to the movies and you would watch this short adventure with whatever hero you were there to see, and in this case it was superheroes. That would eventually change when television became a medium of choice, and you had a Superman TV show, and then eventually you had the Batman TV show, and that extended to a film, possibly the first superhero film. Batman the movie, it's classic, it's a comedy, it's very silly, it's very campy, but it was something new and it was fun, and it's really great, and it does get the character of the time, back when everyone thought that these things should be made for children. But as an adult, as a parody of a character, it is one of the best things that exists.
An exploding shark was pulling my leg.
The Joker.
It all adds up to a sinister riddle. Riddle-er.
Now, the truth is, a superhero wouldn't be taken seriously, or at least adapted fairly from his comic until the 70s when Richard Donner made Superman. Superman is still the pinnacle of superhero movies. I mean, it doesn't hold up incredibly well when you look at some of the camp factors or the fact that it was made in the 70s. There's certain things that are definitely dated from that.
Hey, Jim! Woo! Excuse me. That's a bad outfit!
It was. It really was. But it is really truly a character. And Richard Donner understood, and it came in as something for children, but that tagline said it all, because we all did believe a man could fly after seeing that film. And Christopher Reeve, he is Superman still to many people this day, and Gene Hackman's casting as Lex Luthor was ingenious. It was incredibly good. I hope we can't hear that lawnmower because because that sucks. So when Richard Donner came to do this, he came to do a 2-part film. And unfortunately with the producers, something we're going to see continue to stand in the way of great superhero movies happening over the years, they didn't quite get on too well. So they brought in Richard Lester to finish what he did, and he actually reshot a bunch of Superman 2. That being said, the original Superman 2 really still works as a film. Is it as good as the Donner cut? No, but it still worked, and it was the right direction to take characters. You have this superhero, you're acknowledging the stories from the comics, and you're actually treating him like a character, not something made for children that's a laughingstock. And they took it in a great direction. What happened after that film, I can't say, because Superman 3 and 4 kind of hurt the genre, brought it back to being, well, this is clearly made for children. We don't want that. Like, adults don't want to go pay to see that. We don't need to be dumping money into these things. I mean, Quest for Peace was really, really bad looking because they cut budgets, and Canon, the studio that made it, who would bankrupt themselves shortly after, they just didn't know how to handle the character right, even though I think that the heart of it was there because Christopher Reeve cared about the character. He cared about the stories. He wanted to make sure that it was true and that it worked well. It would be, it's about a decade until we'd see another superhero grace our screen in a meaningful way, and that would be with Batman. Now, the story of Batman is a producer named Michael Uslan. He won, and he had the rights. And this was before WB owned everything to do with DC. He went to every studio in town and he pitched this thing. And they were all like, wait, you mean the pow, zap, wow thing? The thing for children? And he was laughed out of every meeting. No one wanted to make this movie. They didn't want to make a comedy based on a 60s TV show, even though it was a comic that had been running since the 30s. They didn't want it. The interesting thing is, when he was pitching this was the late 70s when he started. Took him a decade to do it. And the cinema of the late 70s is gritty and real. And the irony is, in the comics, they were doing the same thing. In the 50s and 60s, it got campy, it got weird. There was Batmite, he wore different color costumes. I think Polka Dot Man became a thing. These things were all happening, and then artists and writers like Denny O'Neil came on board, and they took the character seriously, and they told gritty and real stories with Batman and every other comic character at that time. And then walked in Frank Miller, who made his Elseworld classic, The Dark Knight Returns, which caught the eye of a filmmaker like Tim Burton. Once Tim Burton came on board to make Batman, things changed. He wanted to bring this gothic story to life, and instead of going with a classic handsome man that everyone looks at as a billionaire playboy in Bruce Wayne, he went with Michael Keaton, which the fans went crazy. There were letter campaigns. This was like a Twitter outrage before Twitter ever existed. But it was the right choice because he had a look in his eye. He knew how to play that character as someone that would be crazy enough to dress up like a Batman. This is one of the first times that it was about the character. It wasn't about trying to make him look exactly like what you saw in the book, but even though you had both these things in Christopher Reeves, they really wanted to just get to the heart of the character and the story, and it shows. Batman is so honorable to the comics. I mean, it misses certain beats for sure. He kills people, and the Joker killing his parents thing, not too great, but everyone involved knew what they were doing, and they took this character seriously. And it was one of the first times that everyone realized you can take this character and it doesn't have to have any cape. You can take it completely seriously and tell a story with it. And it changed filmmaking forever. This logo, this right here, it changed blockbusters forever, because back in the day, it would take time to build a box office gross. You would go ahead and you would take weeks to go ahead and smash records, but Batman did it in a weekend. It dropped, and it completely changed the model. You could market with a simple logo like this, and everyone would want to see the movie.
That night, that summer, was the beginning of something that has yet to end.
And now that's what you see all the time. I mean, there were films like Titanic that ran for like a year to break records, but a lot of times you see what's going on, you see the marketing, and you go to see that movie, and that was all creative with Batman. The issues with Batman come from the idea that Hollywood took the wrong lessons. After Batman, they decided to create pulp characters like The Shadow, Dick Tracy, the Phantom. These are movies that I enjoy. I think they're great, but they're not the movies everyone wants to see. No one knows who these characters are. They didn't have the IP of something like Batman. And Batman itself didn't take the right lessons from the first movie. They went off, and Batman Returns, even though I think it's a fun and weird Tim Burton movie, it doesn't really translate from the comics of the characters that we know and love. Catwoman is a cat burglar in the comics. Penguin is just a mobster that looks like a Penguin. He's not a Penguin Man from the stores, and Catwoman wasn't someone that was brought back to life from cats and suffered some serious trauma. That was there. That was there. And the thing about Batman is, without Michael Keaton in that role, he's barely in that movie, and that's what people wanted to see. I mean, you can argue that the Joker, who Jack Nicholson nails, and really was the definitive version of the live-action character up till Heath Ledger took over the role, that he stole the show in the first Batman, but the truth is there was a lot more balance there. And we need to introduce people to the character to take it seriously, and that was a good way of doing it. And for some reason, they thought every other movie we should focus on the villains because they're more interesting than Batman, which just isn't true. And then you learn something about the whole "this is for kids" thing. They tried to market with McDonald's, and it was a dark and weird movie, and parents were not happy about their kids seeing it and buying McDonald's toys and all that stuff. Just didn't work well, which led them to parting ways with Tim Burton on Batman Forever and making something. It doesn't hold up as well as I would hope, but it's fine. It's a fun movie. It's a little too campy, but I think the lesson from that also went the wrong way when they made Batman and Robin. Batman and Robin was literally made to sell toys. And I find it to be one of those it's so bad it's good movies, but yeah, it would seem that would kill superhero movies. All because they just still weren't taking the characters seriously for what they were. They weren't looking at them as like these great pieces to tell a story with, a serious story. They were sitting there saying it's got to be silly. It's got to be for kids. We can't go ahead and just translate what was on the page of a comic book. That's ridiculous. Let's not do that. And you would think it was a long time until comic movies would start to have a little resurgence, but no. It was only a year later that Blade came out. Blade is quietly first step in the right direction for comic movies because it took a character that it didn't translate as accurately from the comic as you would hope, but it took the essence of that character and put it out there. And it created this gritty R-rated film with a comic book character. And this opened floodgates just a little bit more. And this is a time when Marvel wasn't producing these. Marvel was going bankrupt. So they took all their properties and gave them to the studios. This was New Line Cinema. And it was a hit. It did very well, but most people didn't even realize it was a comic book. No. To get something that we all knew was a comic book, we'd have to wait just another 2 years for X-Men. Now, X-Men, even though it felt a little ashamed of its comic book history, because, they put them all in black leather because...
You actually go outside in these things? What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
We would have preferred that. It really got the characters. It really understood the essence of the story. This was a story about racism in the 60s, and they were able to bring not just that aspect to it, but they were able to apply it to something like being gay or trans in the 2000s. That feeling was there for those characters because that is the core of it, that racism and prejudices, it's wrong, and that people should be allowed to be who they are. I mean, that's the whole point of the yellow costumes that they look past, but that little tiny problem, that's not much of an issue when they get the characters, and it started to make people say, I like this. We could tell stories like this. These characters are great. And honestly, it was a star-making turn for Hugh Jackman. No one saw that coming. He wasn't even supposed to be Wolverine. It was supposed to be Duncan A. Scott. And now, every time you see Wolverine, you think, well, that's Hugh Jackman. Even though in the comics he's like 5'3" and a stocky guy, Hugh Jackman transformed the role because he understood the core of the character and brought that to the screen. And X2 did a great job of continuing that feeling. They did a really great job, and it's still fun, but it tells a story that is serious. It's a huge step. I mean, the biggest problem with those first X-Men movies is that for the third one, 20th Century Fox didn't want to wait. So when Bryan Singer, as problematic as he may be, was off trying to make Superman Returns, another not so great choice by a studio, they didn't want to wait for him, and they ended up hiring Brett Ratner. Problematic as well. And he rushed this movie, and they completely misunderstood the point. I mean, to have a Cure storyline, it didn't work. They set up something from the comics that was there, that everyone was excited about with the Dark Phoenix, and they squandered it. And this comes down to studio execs wanting a product to come out faster. And like I said, this is a running thread. The studio or the producers coming in and saying, this is what we need to do. And honestly, this will be one of the major shifts that happens very soon. But we're not there yet. There's still one more movie franchise that made a huge difference and changed everything. And it's because we're moving on from the dark and gritty world that was created with Batman to another character. Okay. Spider-Man. Now, Spider-Man, that was another movie that was in development for a very long time. There was a time in the 90s when it was supposed to be James Cameron and Leo DiCaprio making this movie, and it's got its own history. Just like Batman, it had a great cartoon in the early 90s, as well as X-Men. It's a wonder that these three properties were the first ones to really take the leap forward for comic books, because we already knew they had great stories to tell. We already saw it work in animated form, and, well, for the first time ever with Spider-Man and director Sam Raimi, it really felt like they just took that cartoon and threw it up in live action. With Spider-Man, that first movie, Sam Raimi really brought the comics to life. He loved the comics, he loved that early Peter Parker, and if anything, he made it even more like outlandish by giving him organic web shooters instead of letting him use mechanical ones. Apparently, they didn't like the way it was looking on screen, so they decided to go with the organic ones.
Go web! Fly!
Outside of that, the comic book costume is accurate. Outside of like the Green Goblin and the costume they landed on, most of it feels like it was ripped straight from the comic book. And he loved the characters, he loved the stories. And that was evident in the sequel. In Spider-Man 2, still to this day, Doc Ock might be up there as one of the best villains in history. And that's not just in comic books, in film. He has a great story arc. It's very tragic. It's like one of the Universal monsters. It's amazing. This really opened the door. This is at the time when you'd start seeing a movie like Daredevil or Ghost Rider come out, because the studio was trying to emulate that Sam Raimi feeling. There was a little bit of camp to it. There was a little bit of seriousness. It was a good mix. It felt like you were reading a comic book. It was a live action cartoon. And there was still that vibe of maybe it's for children, but there was enough stuff there taking it seriously. I mean, look at this moment from Spider-Man 2. That's a horror movie. That is a horror movie. He got it so right. And again, the big problem that stopped it from just continuing to be this ginormous franchise that just kept going and going and going was the studio tried to say, you know what, the fans really want Venom, so put it in your story. You can't do that. When a director has a vision, you can't just go ahead and say, we know this is a story you're trying to tell, but we want you to put this thing in there. Can you do that? Can you just put this guy in there even though he doesn't fit? You just can't do that. That's the problem. The capper of the trilogy was disappointing because it was too much going on. There were too many cooks in the kitchen. Someone needed to streamline it down. Someone needed to go ahead and say, this is the story I'm telling, and let me do it. And that was about to happen. In 2005, Warner Brothers was finally going to go ahead and take another shot at Batman, and they decided to take a chance on a filmmaker who had only made 2 films with studios at this point. And he was ready to take a big leap. And now he's a brand all his own. Chris Nolan. I'm talking about Christopher Nolan. Batman Begins, even though it wasn't the biggest box office success you've ever seen, it paved the way for something huge to come. First off, it took the character of Batman and it focused on him instead of the villains. It took straight from the comics so many storylines, and it was weaving them together in a way that was dynamic and really felt great. He worked with David Goyer, who helped to bring Blade to life. There was a lot going on here that really made Batman Begins work, and it took Batman in a direction that was different, but it still felt like the comics. The thing about Batman Begins is, as important as it was the sequel. It was the sequel that said something that would change how we can look at comic book movies forever. It said, this is an artistic vision. This is not just a comic book movie. This is a serious feature film with characters from a comic book. And The Dark Knight was so good with its performances from Heath Ledger, Christian Bale, and Aaron Eckhart among them that it changed the Oscars forever. People were so upset it didn't get nominated that now you can have up to 10 movies nominated for an Oscar, all because that was snubbed. It was a huge deal. And the one thing you could say about the trilogy capper this time is The Dark Knight Rises was Christopher Nolan's vision. It was not everyone's favorite movie. It had a lot going on, but this was the first time that a full story was told with this character. It's the only thing that's been completed so far. It's the only one. There aren't any other trilogies that I can think of in the comic book genre that have found an end, because he chose to tell a story from start to finish, and it worked. It worked really well. And what this told studios is that these characters can be taken seriously. You can go ahead and you can take them seriously enough, and you can win Oscars. it changed the game. People really took it seriously. And there's only one thing that stops that from being the only lesson from The Dark Knight in 2008. And that is the launch of Iron Man. And changing everything with one scene. One scene changed everything. And it was after the credits.
You think you're the only superhero in the world?
Iron Man is a really good movie. And it obviously made Robert Downey Jr. a huge star again. After dealing with so many issues in his life, the studio decided they could take a chance on him, and it paid off in spades. Everything about this movie screams it was like a student film behind the scenes, that they were making stuff up, they were ad-libbing, but they knew that they had great stuff in the source material, and Kevin Feige knew that he had a great plan for what they could do. They had this idea of just connecting the movies, and all it took was that post-credit scene with Nick Fury there, talking about the Avengers initiative, and suddenly the game had changed. The thing that Marvel did that other movies weren't doing at that time is they decided they wanted to go ahead and not just take the characters from the comic books, they wanted to take the feeling of the comic books. They wanted to take what comic books meant, that every month you would have a different issue that would tell a new piece of the story. And that's what they brought to the screen. We were seeing the culmination of that first piece, that first phase of Marvel happen. And it was huge. The Avengers, bringing these characters together, it's something that had been done in the animated form on the DC animated universe and with Batman and Superman in the 90s, but it's not the same as a feature. This is unprecedented. This was crazy. And it's really magnificent how they're able to pull it off. And honestly, I think it deserves a shirt change. Alright, so after the Avengers, everything had changed. Everything had shifted because it became not just about comic books anymore. It became about how do we do a shared universe? And once again, Hollywood was taking not exactly the best lessons from it. And it turned out that Marvel was the only one that really understood that by taking the time and care for these characters, that's how you made it work. It wasn't about the formula of a shared universe. It was about caring about the stories of the characters. When Man of Steel launched in 2013, it was very loosely connected to a universe. They didn't know if they were going to do one. And even though it's divisive, it is a good Superman story. Henry Cavill is a good Superman. He just doesn't know if he's Superman yet. And it works really well. And that's the thing. A lot of people feel like when the MCU came out, the superhero movies, that's what they were. Whatever the MCU is doing, that's what they are. And there is some formulaic aspects to it, but the truth is, with the exception of some stuff that happened right prior to and right after the Avengers, Kevin Feige learned that you have to let directors tell the stories with the characters that matter. You can't just shoehorn in connectivity. It needs to feel organic. And ever since then, these movies are mostly just phenomenal character studies. They are taking the mythological characters that we know and love. They're taking what would have been Robin Hood and King Arthur and Hercules, and they're just telling really great stories. It's just about caring about the characters. It's not about a universe. We know because they have tried to do a Robin Hood and King Arthur shared universe. Didn't work too well. No. And the problem is that we want to see good and rich stories. We don't care about them being connected. And comic book movies have been trying to do that and have succeeded many times over the years at doing that. So yeah, the MCU, that started in 2008 with Iron Man. And yeah, it might have started a trend of extended universes, but we're already seeing that trend break. DC struggled because they wanted to go ahead and take what Zack Snyder had done and force it into a universe. And listen, the universe can work. The problem is you didn't take the time to develop it. They should have done a Batman film. They should have done a sequel to Man of Steel. And then maybe you try and bring the Trinity together for a film. And the thing is, I think they realize that now. Now they're giving us other things that are great, like Shazam. Aquaman was bonkers and nuts. There are so many things you could do with these characters that don't sit into a formula of like, what is a comic book movie? If you look back at the X-Men franchise, they've had ups and downs. They had X-Men Origins Wolverine, and that's pretty bad. It's a pretty bad movie, and it doesn't do justice to Wolverine or a character like Deadpool. But what they did is they said, okay, but what if we did it a different way? Who cares about the continuity of it? Who cares if it connects? So they made Deadpool, and they made Deadpool 2. And Ryan Reynolds really gets the character, and those movies are terrific, and now he's going to go in the MCU, and I don't think they're going to change a thing.
I know, right? Whose balls did I have to fondle to get my very own movie?
I think he's going to go ahead and he's going to be the character because that's who people want to see. They don't care if it is like, how does it tie into Iron Man and what's going on and the MCU and what will be the post-credits scene that sets it up for whatever Captain America sequel's coming. No, they just want to see Deadpool and they want to see him treated correctly. They don't want people to be ashamed of what he was or try and modify him because it's meant to be for children. If you're going to make Deadpool PG-13, you better make sure that he's breaking that fourth wall and acknowledging that the House of Mouse said, no more cursing. No curse, no blood. Deadpool, no do. Do something, but make sure it's true to the character. The thing about Wolverine is they were able to go ahead and they were able to tell a story in The Wolverine that was almost there. It went and said, who cares what we did in Origins? We have a rich character, and it kind of redeemed a little bit of The Last Stand, things like that. They did a great job in retroactively fixing films in that universe. Logan is an incredible film. Not just comic book film, it's an incredible film. I still feel like it deserved to win some Oscars for that, and Patrick Stewart was completely underrated as Professor X in that movie and deserved an Oscar nomination. These movies are amazing and the characters are amazing, and when creators realize that and tell the stories, it'll just keep going. As long as you don't try and take the wrong lessons from it, then the comic book thing will continue. It's gonna continue, and it wasn't just created in one Marvel universe. It wasn't created 20 years ago. It's been going on for decades, several decades. Something that always sticks out to me that I find interesting is that Kevin Feige has said before any of the Marvel films, they watch Richard Donner's Superman. And that says volumes because the lesson is that when you take a character, when you go and you take the core essence of that character and you put it out there, no matter what way you're representing it, if you're doing it in a dark and gritty manner like the Dark Knight trilogy did, if you're doing it in more of a campy, crazy way that feels straight from a comic book like Sam Raimi did, if you're doing something that's kind of in between where it's taking it seriously but it's also for everyone like the MCU, or if you're just going and breaking the fourth wall and being ridiculous and cursing and cutting people's limbs off like in Deadpool, no matter what way you're doing it, no matter what way you're telling a story, as long as you care about your characters, whether from literature, from graphic novels and comic books, or from a video game, which who knows, maybe they're gonna finally figure that one out soon. As long as you go and you understand those things, you're always gonna have a story to tell. And superhero movies, they're not going anywhere, and they will evolve with the times because they're not a genre, and it wasn't created overnight, and it's not going away overnight. People like to compare superhero movies to the Western, and Westerns still exist. The problem is there was an oversaturation of a type of Western. There was too much of a certain story, and people got tired of it. But Westerns is genre. I can't name many cowboys from those because that's the thing, is you inserted whatever cowboy into that story and that's your Western. Superhero movies is the opposite. You're taking a rich character, you're taking a detective, you're taking a god, you're taking a mad scientist, and you're putting him in whatever story you want to tell. It's really interesting when you look at the MCU because we've seen a Greek tragedy, we've seen a Greek comedy.
I'm a trickster. Yes, so mischievous.
We've seen a pulp action movie. We've seen a political thriller. We've seen a crazy team up. We've seen an apocalyptic event. We've seen so many different stories. They're not the same thing. The superhero genre is not the same thing. They're just amazing characters that we get to tell stories with right now because the people in charge finally realize that these characters aren't just for kids. They're for everyone. And I can't wait to see what stories are coming. There's definitely a lot to look forward to. So those are my thoughts about superhero movies and how we got here. Please leave a like and a comment and subscribe. Let me know what you're thinking. Turn on your notifications. And I will see you in the next one.